Unfortunately, conventional hiring processes have really basically been developed without neurodiversity in mind. They've been developed sort of for the 80% and not the 20%. A big part of diversity of thought is my brain doesn't work the same as yours, so I just attack problems really differently.
Can you build a bit of a framework how a founder should think through this matrix of problems? Welcome to Outsource to Profits. I have a fantastic guest. Ed, do you mind taking a moment, introduce yourself, your company, and how you serve the world?
Great to be here. I'm Ed Thompson, CEO and founder of Uptimize. We help teams improve collaboration by transforming understanding of different thinking and work styles. Teams use our upskill platform and workshops to learn more about the fact that everybody is just wired differently and how to achieve better synergy and better performance through doing that. We've worked with organizations from IBM, Salesforce, Deloitte, Accenture, Google. I'm also a frequent speaker on this topic, as well as the author of a book called A Hidden Force, Unlocking the Potential of Neurodiversity at Work.
This is fantastic. I've owned 3 7-figure agencies and then a bunch of smaller agencies. And I've always had co-founders. And now I have 70 employees. So think of all the different working styles that happen in a business. And I look at my own co-founders. I've had a co-founder as an example that I call him like order of operations. If a vendor was trying to sell him something, if they didn't articulate exactly how 1 connected to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, the whole thing didn't make sense. Where I'm very much like a build it as I jump off the cliff at the same time. Like I would sell something that doesn't exist. And then I look at my current co-founder, Derek. He and I'm in 1,000 Google Meets a week, and he builds his working style so he could be in 0 Google Meets a week. And so and sometimes there's a bit of a clash. You're just like, yeah, but you need to jump in more. And then he tells me I need to jump out more. So this leads to my first question. How many different working styles are there? If there's ever been something mapped like that, are there kind of names and categories for them? And if not, maybe you can use just from your own experience and generality, like the audience here is founders, go-to-market leaders. You are going to, and as a go-to-market leader, you probably read the book, The Challenger Sale. There's all these archetypes. What are these archetypes and what should you be prepared for as you build out and scale a business?
Let me answer it this way, because I think there's always a desire to put people in boxes, which is helpful but can be unhelpful, I think, at times. The reason this matters, let's talk about the reason this matters. The reason it matters is because our brains just don't work the same. We have functions and processes in our brain, our executive functions, how we manage short-term memory, smaller tasks, how you process information of different types. That's going to be different from me. How you process the sensory world, that's going to be different from me. So why does that matter when we work together? It matters because that's going to influence how we learn, how we communicate, how we problem solve, and the type of environment and work environment we want to have. To your point, some people are going to be, want to work at certain types of day, very sensitive to interruptions, want their own kind of managed sensory experience. Others, the opposite. So it's best probably thinking about this in terms of almost like dials on a mixing board, and everyone is somewhere on all of these dials. And that's going to lead us to being the very kind of rich, differentiated individuals that we all are. But again, why that matters is because what has happened in business is that business has known that we don't all think the same, which is why you see the popularity of personality tests and so on, right? But what they have ended up doing, and this is why I kind of was making this point at the beginning about putting people in boxes, is I can do a big assessment. Maybe that tells me a bunch about me. You can do one, tells you a bunch about you. But if all I get out of that about you at the end is that you're a innovator or a introvert systemizer, it's not unhelpful, but it doesn't really help me with the practical stuff of just how do I work with you every day? When do I send you feedback? In what format? How sensitive are you to interruptions? How do we run meetings effectively? It's not really helping me with any of that stuff. And that's actually the stuff that you need help with if you're going to collaborate with people with different brains effectively. So that's really kind of where Uptimize is playing. It's playing at that level of practical cognition in terms of how that plays out as we collaborate.
And as I look at my team, and I'm trying to set culture as an example as a founder, some might set culture by having a work in office culture. Some can be remote. Some are very much a results oriented business, and some are kind of more micromanaged daily actions and activities. A lot of times the culture is set around us, the founders. How do I ensure that the people that I'm adding on the bus are actually going to fit within the molds? Because there's two ways to think about it. Either we can all wrap around the axle of all the different modalities of learning or styles, which could be a hodgepodge, or I then have to attract talent that's also going to have to fit within my mold. But at the same time, to your point, like when we were talking off camera, you're going to have to learn to adapt, to recognize that people all work differently. Mm-hmm. Can you build a bit of a framework how a founder should think through this matrix of problems?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm already enjoying this conversation, Jamie. I get asked a lot of the same questions, and so I appreciate the question you just asked. I think it's a really interesting one. I think there's two kind of ways to look at this if you're a founder. And look, I'm a founder of a business as well. So one of them is the diversity of thought angle. There is a lot of evidence to say that having different people with different brains, different perspectives, now wherever they get those, could be cultural, could be experiential and so on. But a big part of diversity of thought is my brain doesn't work the same as yours. So I just attack problems really differently. That's valuable. And I think we've all seen and felt that. You know, I'm lucky enough to have met a lot of neurodivergent people in my work who just approach things in just this brilliantly different way. And it's like, that's just so valuable for how we work together. So I think that's the first point. People are different. There's value in that difference. And people value flexibility. People aren't the same. They don't all come in the same shape and size. So flexibility as much as possible is always going to be important. But to your point, I think it's also okay. And look, it to some degree, it's just going to happen if the founder is a strong personality. But kind of like a sports coach, I think you can build a team with a certain kind of vibe. You know, we want a certain kind of ethos or approach. You know, just as a coach is building their offensive line, and it's like, you know, we want a certain profile here. I think that's fine as long as you're conscious of it, and as long as you're conscious that you're then potentially losing some of that variation, and also conscious that even if you do try to hire people for that kind of culture, they're still not automatons. And you're still going to want some flexibility there in order to make the best out of each other, because you're never going to find, and you know this, Jamie, you know, I think when people start businesses, sometimes they're running around, they're a solo founder, and they think, gosh, I wish I had 5 more Jamies. And then very quickly they think, actually, I don't want 5 more Jamies. I want a Steve, a Bob, a Sarah, you know. And so it is a wonderful balance. But I think it's the consciousness, the conscientiousness around it that's really what I would be preaching.
As a founder, especially as you start to scale, at first you're just in wanderlust of doing anything you can to generate revenue. And then eventually you get into 7 figures and you start thinking about risk mitigation. Like, how do you make sure the trains don't come off the track? In risk mitigation and talent acquisition and talent retention, can you make it tactile? 1 or 2 things, ultimate pitfalls. Again, think of all the matrix of different personalities. You've created a box that is allowed for some individualism and some freedom of flexibility, work-life balance, this whole bit. Can you give what are the ultimate round peg square holes that you've seen where the clash of either a working style or a thinking style of talent coming in will absolutely collide with your perceived culture or real culture, and that you as a founder should be thinking about risk mitigation of just screening for these things or looking for these things? Anything tactile you can give that way?
Yeah, I mean, let's explore a few places where this can go wrong, but those are all opportunities also for it to go right. Let's talk about talent acquisition, because that's when people come into the building. Now, the dangers of talent acquisition, if we value people who think differently, we value people who are going to bring us a different perspective, which we should as startup founders. That's pretty important. Unfortunately, conventional hiring processes have really basically been developed without neurodiversity in mind. They've been developed sort of for the 80% and not the 20%. Mm-hmm. So they are full of friction points that really, unfortunately, mean that people unintentionally exclude often the best talent. We've seen many, many examples of that. Now, that could be because of process being confusing, stressful. That could be because of interviewers just don't know anything about the fact that cognition can cause people to present very differently. So somebody who doesn't make eye contact, somebody who talks in a monotone affect, it doesn't mean they're not interested. I mean, they're probably interested if they're doing an interview with you. But Jamie, you wouldn't believe the power of rapport-based hiring. I like you, therefore I'm hiring you, is so huge. And that is not how to get the best people.
I just had this call with, we're scaling our account management team. I had this call with one of our account managers that one of the things that I will remove from myself as we're scaling quicker than the other parts of the sales ecosystem will be me as the final decision maker on talent acquisition, mm-hmm. because I have a tendency to, number one, I see the good in everybody. And number two, I am the island of misfit toys. That's what I call it. I am the guy who's the unemployable, the guy who started a million businesses. And I like guys that have tried to start businesses. So I see myself and other people, and that's not always the best thing. So to exactly the point,
it's powerful. And we've worked with massive corporations that have admitted to us, both in the macro and the micro, that they've hired people they wouldn't have hired before, but they've also admitted that those people had the strongest resumes, right? So this is not charity. They weren't hiring the best people because there was some of this bias kicking in. Let's talk about another piece, which I think is really important for startup leaders, which is decision-making. Now, again, as you evolve as a startup founder, you're going to recognize that you don't have all the answers, or you should recognize that you don't have all the answers. You're building this team to make decisions more powerfully than you can alone. But you have challenges here in terms of work style, because let's just take a strategy exercise, right? A lot of startup founders are going to be, I would guess, verbal, visual types. I mean, I'm the same, right? Let's get in front of a whiteboard, let's talk it out, all of that stuff. Now, you get your team doing that, guaranteed X% of them, it's just not going to work for them at all. It's not how they can contribute. So there's a real danger as managers, as startup founders, of you might build a team that potentially has all this power to make great collective decisions, but you're not doing enough in terms of psychological safety and in terms of process to have the sensitivity that different people want to contribute in very different ways. And so that's a really important thing. Strategy, going back to that example, give people opportunities to review what you're going to talk about before. Give people opportunities to go sit in a dark room for 24 hours and come up with their thoughts on what everyone else came up with in an hour, because that's how their brain works.
Yeah. This has been fantastic. How do people get a hold of you and learn more when they're starting to use and maybe explain a little bit where your solution best fits as well at the same time?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, best way to reach out, I'm always happy to give my email address, ed.thompson with a P at Uptimize, uptimize.com, and, reach out to us at uptimize.com as well. I mentioned my book, A Hidden Force. We are helping teams really kind of recognize their own neurodiversity. And bear in mind, this is a concept. Look, it sounds so obvious. We all have a different brain, right? It just sounds like, well, we all know that, but that concept's only been around about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So in business, this is incredibly new as an idea. The fact that, neurodiversity doesn't just mean, oh, what do I do if I have an autistic colleague and how do I not screw it up? This is the fundamental kind of cognition that's driving all of these collaborative processes and we're not paying enough attention to. So we take teams. We've worked with 700,000 people, companies, and trained en masse. Just what is this? Why should we care? And how do we inject this into our workflows? We work with managers, HR, recruiters, and so on in more kind of targeted, role-specific engagements, and really just give them, not just. It's kind of two things. It's an initial new kind of prism, if you like, on just everything I'm doing is kind of coming through this lens of how I think and everything everybody else is doing, my clients, my customers, my partners, my team members is the same. And then it's about kind of building that practical, toolkit, if you like, on top of that, so that you have that moment of pause. So, you and I work together, Jamie, let's say I'm your boss, right? I recognize all the time that we're not the same. And then it's giving me that toolkit to actually put that into practice.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on Outsource to Profits.
Thanks, Jamie.